I've devoted my last 4 years to researching and facilitating shadow integration in my clients and for people on the internet, but let me be completely honest with you. All of these books around me, this entire library experience is near worthless if we don't cover the foundational basics of parts work and active imagination. I want you to calibrate your conversations with your unconscious, or to put that simply, I want you to know how to speak so that your shadow will actually listen. In this video, I'm going to be giving you a basic framework for both the mentality and the method of integrating your shadow, because I want you to try and get to this picture that I've painted out on the thumbnail of having a wonderful inner council in the clouds. You've got your inner children at the various ages, your masculine and your feminine archetypes, and a spattering of golden shadow potential, all sitting around this Arthurian golden shadow, inner worky, active imagination council. I want you to tap into your inner wisdom, is what I'm trying to say. But you're not going to get there unless we lay out the absolute foundation. And I received this question, which I'm going to flash on the screen. You can pause and read if you want, but otherwise it's basically a request to do a number 101 foundational basics video. So let's do exactly that. I have 2 books I want to flash up and recommend to you. I recommend that you read Embracing Ourselves by Hal and Sidra Stone, which is going to give you a really good take on the practical shadow personality subformation with a variety of really good exercises in there as well. And also John Rowan's Subpersonalities, which is another wonderful take on the formation of subpersonalities in the okay, not okay splitting and introjection. You can read these yourself. I've covered them elsewhere. They are not even necessarily just beginner. They both go into more advanced territory, but just some information right up front before we go into the talking part of the video. First part of active imagination, how to speak with your shadow so that they will listen and you can have a productive conversation which is going to help you heal all of the trauma of your past and self-actualize your higher potential. You need to focus on your mindset, and that means 2 things. You need to firstly have curiosity and a sense of adventure. You have to have a genuine desire to get to know your inner child and your various archetypal figures. But point number 2, a bit of a tangential point, you also need to check yourself. You need to make sure that you're not falling into fascination or fantasy. And that's very difficult to define, because you're going to say to me, hey Jordan, I'm trying to do active imagination and inner work. Of course, that requires me to go into a visionary state, to have a meditative experience and to work with my fantasy in an active way. It's called active imagination. Why are you telling me to not get so fascinated? It's because it's a subtle grounding suggestion. I want you to have enough curiosity with approaching your parts that you want to learn about your inner children and you want to learn about various shadow subpersonalities, but I don't want you to go into this with such a degree of expectation and ungrounded, unstable fascination that you're going to get swept away by the various voices that you might hear, especially if you've got a history of trauma. If you've got a history of feeling like you're living as a floating head cut off at the neck and not really having a solid ego identity, or otherwise having an unsteady footing in day-to-day reality, you don't want to run off into your inner world and take the advice of the first person that you see, because it might be your true self, it might be your golden shadow wearing the face of the wise old man or the wise old woman, and it could also be more of a inner child or the dark side of an inner child aspect, throwing a bit of a temper tantrum, and you misinterpret the advice to quit your job and do something else, because actually it's just an inner child part that didn't want to go to work that day, rather than the sophisticated guidance of your inner wisdom, whatever it might be. Just watch out for it. You need to know that your mentality is grounded. Do not go into voice dialogue conversation. Don't even read books like these 2 books. An interesting hold up there. They were both back to front. I'm going to now put them into a sandwich like this, like they're making love to each other and all the parts can have a wonderful experience in a very sensual way. Even there, that's a bit too fascinating, a bit too extravagant. And if it seems like I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm actually trying to really overly simplify things in a way which makes it so much safer. I don't want you to get too complex too quickly, and that means the complexity of what you're trying to do, but also your expectations and demands that you're already pre-framing before you go into meditative work. If you've already started to explore things like your inner child, or you've heard about the masculine and feminine archetypes, or you've seen some more accessible shadow work material on the internet, it's very easy to want to chase that feeling to the absolute depth. You want to see just how close to your soul you can get, and it's usually those kinds of people that end up going into more delusional and unfortunately quite emotionally unstable territory if they're not quite ready to have the conversation. To phrase it a different way, don't start trying to have a conversation with 10 different friends at once if you don't know how to have a conversation with just one friend one-to-one. If you're going to form this council of inner advisors, and in the second half of this video I'm going to give you the method to do it, but if you're going to try and form this council, make sure that you know where you sit at that table. Don't lose your aware ego, which is what Hal and Sidra Stone have as a substitute for the adult ego identity, or just you as your name. I don't lose my identity as Jordan, sat at the seat of the table, and let my consciousness shift around to whichever part may indeed have something to say. The way to approach your inner council is to know each part one by one, and there's a variety of journeys you can go down there. Maybe you meet them in different settings, but if you're at the point where you've got half a dozen to a dozen different parts sitting on your inner council, you need to know where you sit, and you need to have the ability to relationally engage as if it was a real-world example where you're listening to a person speak, you're listening to one friend, and then you listen to another friend, and ultimately, you are the deciding force. You get the final vote. You go in with respect. This is part of the method, but you go in with respect, and you start having the conversations, but you are the one who makes the final choice. Just because a part said you should do something doesn't mean you should do it, and the way to catch yourself before you fall down those rabbit holes is to just withdraw your fascination, but have enough curiosity to go there in the first place. If you're still watching a video like this at this point, you've clearly got enough curiosity to want to go into your inner world and try and get things going, so let's move over into the method. But before I do go into the method, I need to let you know that I do have a shadow work course called the Shadow Work Library. You can see it up on the screen. There is a 5-hour playlist of free material. Down in the description, you can click the free shadow work playlist and see some of the best shadow work on the internet, and we're going to take this to a much deeper level than I can possibly go in just an introductory video. Nonetheless, what's the method of active imagination? There are many ways to approach this, and I suppose the simplest way to approach it would be how to actually have the conversation. I don't need to give you any particular ritual specifics. Some people get this idea that they need to light the 3 candles facing north, east, and west, and then they need to face south and say a special prayer so that their shadow is going to appear and be cooperative, but that's just not the case. You don't need to make a particularly sacred space every single time. I want you to have enough sanctity and enough intention in the same way you would for your morning meditation practice or if you were sitting down to journal, but you don't need to have perfect religious conditions to be able to talk with parts of yourself, because it's still fundamentally you. The psyche is very complex, but in a completely oversimplified way. It's still all you. Every single part that you could see as okay or not okay, bringing out this diagram again from John Rowan in Subpersonality, is you have to remember that that boundary right around the edge, that boundary, that circle, that is all you. You're all of this, and the parts are nested within you, and their depth opens up at the bottom through conversation and dialogue, sometimes even somatic practice and dreams. That's a whole nother element of the conversation. It's all there. You don't need to create the perfect condition. In the same way, again, good framing for the video and good framing for your practice. If you were to phone your best friend, you don't need to wait until the candles are lit and the sage is burning on the counter. You can just phone your friend whenever they're available, or even spontaneously, just because you want to talk to them, and you can expect that with good accuracy they're going to pick up and you can start the conversation. Eventually, as your practice continues, you'll be able to be out on a walk in the forest and just check in with an inner child or a shadow subpersonality. You'll start to feel intuitive guidance within the day-to-day moments, but at the very beginning, as you're setting out the space and you're trying to do your active imagination practice, just mirror the same conditions that you would need for a normal meditation practice or a normal journaling or reflective exercise. And then all you need to do is there's two methods. You can either do eyes closed, pure active imagination, go into the visualization and take yourself on a guided journey, or you can do more of a Jungian style, writing out the active imagination. Different things work for different people. I personally don't tend to write the experience as I'm going through it. I will record the experience afterwards. Other people write piece by piece, and it slows their mind down to be able to capture what's going on. You can set the method depending on your preference. More imaginative visual types may be more open to dropping into a meditative state immediately, and people who are more linguistic might want more of a written approach. And if both of them don't feel like they're happening for you, you sat there for 15 minutes and nobody showed up, it's just blank or it's boring, or you're in kind of distracted meditation consciousness, you might need to get some help. You might need a facilitator, or at least someone who can support you at the beginning stages of learning how to unlock that process in yourself. I don't tend to want to do guided meditations. I do a few of them inside of the course, but generally speaking, this is something you can build from the inside if you just develop the right conditions and show up with consistency. But let's imagine that you've got the condition of beautiful meditation, you're choosing to visualize. How do you actually prompt the active imagination scene? There's a few different ways to enter in from a practical perspective. You can set an intention to meet a certain part that you know of. You can say, I'm going to go into active imagination to meet my age 10 inner child. And me, I see my age 10 inner child, or I say, I'm going to go and meet my ideal masculine archetype. And I see myself in my mid-50s. There's my golden shadow, there's masculine archetypes, and I can go and talk with that part because I've developed these relationships. That requires a level of understanding about the archetypes and subpersonalities to begin with. So if you're not yet at that stage, that's the ideal situation. You know which part you're going to talk with, and you go to them. You can either track a behavior, or you can also track a general territory. Inside my course, I talk about the shadow being broken down into shadow territories, shadow entities, and shadow behaviors. I have a variety of exercises where we look into this in way more detail, but a shadow behavior in general is something like the habit that you have which you know is bad for you and you're doing it quite often. You're spending too much time on your phone, you've got indecision or career fatigue, or not showing up for work, you've got bickering in your relationship, you're abusing yourself in substances. Whatever your particular vice or malady may be, you can focus on that and say, I want to meet the part who is responsible for my insert the problem. Again, people would say, oh, don't call your life the problem, don't say, but subjectively speaking, when you have a problem, you refer to it as a problem, and the high-minded love and light perspective of seeing all things as an opportunity to learn, that can be appropriate further down the journey. For the sake of simplicity, if you know you've got a shadow behavior, or you know there's a whole shadow territory of, I want to meet the parts that are responsible for my issues at work, I want to meet the parts that are responsible for my issues in relationship, the territory of work, the territory of relationships, those are three different ways to start off the conversation. You've got a calm setting, you've set the intention, and you say, I want to meet my inner child, or I want to meet the part of me that's responsible for my procrastination, or I want to meet the part of me that I want to meet the parts of me that exist within my relationship territory. Just name three examples. You can go with named entity, named behavior, or you can go for a territory up front. What do you do when you're in the conversation? Variety of people will have a variety of different responses compared to their own imaginal capacities and their own particular childhood history or their understanding of archetypal natures. The fundamental thing that I want you to just keep in mind, to keep it super simple, super basic for beginners, just have a conversation with them as if they're a real person and be respectful. Ask open-ended, curious questions. Don't try and bully your way into a conversation. Don't start whipping them around the face because they're not immediately giving you the answer to your... It just doesn't work. It does not work. You wouldn't go to a friend who you haven't seen in a while and you want to learn more about their life and demand that they give you the answer to your personal, deep-held question. You haven't even built any rapport. You haven't checked in with them like, oh, how are you? I didn't know you were here. Or why are you here? Or just basic, normal questions. It seems silly, and you might, if you're unfamiliar with this work, you might think I've gone completely insane. But just a little bit of courtesy for your inner parts will go a long way. If I'm ever going to meet my inner child, and I went into a scene where I'm imagining my 10-year-old self, and I've identified that I've got this problem with procrastination or a problem with relationship communication, and I know it's my inner child, and I go in and I say, hey, Why are you running away from that difficult conversation? Obviously, it's bullying, tyrannical father energy. Or I say, don't you know better? Shouldn't you be having that difficult conversation? And it's like, snarky, unconscious mothering energy. Either of those two or 50 other different unconscious responses, they're not going to give you the results that you actually want. You need to go in with respect, compassion, and the curiosity that we established in the first half of the video, that open-hearted, open-minded mentality, and just have the conversations. It's up to you to go into that space. I'm not going to spoil the experience for you. One little safety check that I can advise, however, is if parts start to get somewhat combative and it starts to feel too intense, you are in control to just say, this is getting too much right now, I'll check back in later. The crucial element at the end of I'll check back in later or I'll be back later, just give a little bit of a hook both for yourself and also for the part that you will indeed return. You're not abandoning, especially if you're dealing with an inner child part, and most of us have an abandoned inner child at one point or another, and don't run away from them just because the heat got turned up a little bit and you found it uncomfortable. Active imagination has many different flavors and many different methods and modalities. You've got parts work, voice dialogue, internal family systems. You've got Jungian style active imagination and archetypal work. You've got other types of hypnotherapy and regressive therapies. You can go into past lives or future lives, or there's so many different flavors of this. I hope that this video has nonetheless been useful to give you the absolute foundation of curiosity without inflation and having respectful conversations in mundane, slightly special conditions, and just popping your bubble of this being something which is going to sweep you away. Because the questioner who asked this question, prompted this whole video, they had so many different moments of how do I do this, what's the right way to do it, and some kind of hesitation between the lines as well. I can help them to feel better by just bringing it down to earth. It's not that special. You're very special, your parts are very special, I get it, I feel very special myself. But it's not that special a process. In the same way that if you know your best friend is going to show up if you want to have a call every week, your parts will also show up if you want to have a talk every single week. And over time, you will build the council of your soul, you will have your inner wisdom council inside of the cloud city of your mind, and you'll be able to get a variety of practical suggestions and interesting positive intrusions towards how you should live your life. You can build this process at depth, and once again, I do recommend you go and click directly in the description my free shadow work playlist. I do believe it is the best shadow work playlist for free on YouTube, and you can go watch those 15 videos and see if you agree with me. In fact, I'm pretty certain that you will, but you'll have to go click down there, and I will see you over in the shadow work playlist for some more advanced conversation.